I'm Heather Staines. I'm a senior strategy consultant at Delta Think and one of the Charleston directors. And I couldn't be more thrilled to be able to be here today with Jay Flynn to have what we hope will be kind of an informal conversation. I'll kick off with a few questions, but we definitely want to hear from you. I'm told there's a handheld mic that will somehow magically make its way to you if you have a question. So you can maybe put your hand up or move to the side or jump up and down, that kind of thing, and we'll make sure that you're recognized. So let's go ahead and get started. So just to kick us off, not doing an intro, I'm going to let Jay introduce himself. Tell us a little bit about you, your current role at Wiley, and how Wiley is kind of situated in the scholarly communications ecosystem today.
Okay. Hi, everybody.
It's a big question.
Yeah, I'll be done in 45 minutes. So anyway, my name is Jay Flynn. Hi. I'm glad to be here. This is my first Charleston conference. And so part of what I've been doing since this morning is just kind of taking it all in. And I'm really glad to be here. In terms of trying to give a short answer to Heather's question, I grew up in a factory town in Ohio and went to Jesuit University and then did graduate work at UPenn and thought I wanted to be a professor. Thought I wanted to go into academia. Was in a PhD program in German, of all things, and then moved out of that after I decided that wasn't the thing that was going to be what I wanted to pursue as a full-time career. And so I moved into publishing pretty shortly after that, about 96. For those of you who are old enough to remember that initial print to digital migration from first sort of taking tapes and then taking CDs and jukeboxes and then moving from there to delivering sort of some of the earliest online products and services. I worked on the Science Direct team at Elsevier and have been at Wiley for about 12 years with stops at Cengage Learning and Wolters Kluwer along the way. And today I have the privilege to lead a team of about 2,500 colleagues and friends and coworkers who work in the Wiley research business. So that's our journals, databases business, but obviously Wiley's got a large books business as well. That's been in the news lately, some of you may have heard. So just delighted to get a chance to talk to everybody today.
Great. So you have a real fondness for libraries. When we did the preparation for this, and for also, I should plug, we did a Charleston leadership interview that will be available soon. Tell us a little bit about your earliest experience with libraries and how that affected your life.
So I do. I come by that honestly. I feel like I was this summer reading kid. I was the kind of kid who my mother would take me to the library in grade school to learn how to use library resources. So the Reader's Guide. I taught myself how to use a microfilm machine by the time I was probably in 7th or 8th grade. I feel like I really came by my affection for the role libraries play in teaching and learning first, just in terms of learning how to read, just in terms of learning how to become information literate, how to navigate resources, those kinds of things. But I've had a chance to work with all kinds of different library groups in my career, if it was the School Library Association, if it was PLA, in my time at Gale, and obviously most of my career working with academic libraries. And a couple of things really resonate for me in terms of where we are right now at this moment, at least in the business I represent and the part of the ecosystem that Wiley plays in. And that's that I think we're at a really interesting moment. It's bigger than print to digital. It's bigger than the movement away from subscription agents into big deal pricing and online services. It's twice or 3 times as big, I think, just in terms of the amount of change it's going to bring about. And it makes me really confident and excited to know that there's such passion around the issue, because I think that as an organization at Wiley, we do best when we listen to feedback from librarians on a global basis. And I think the role that libraries play in both teaching and learning and in collection development as it relates to certainly journal collections is a crucial one, not just for my business, but for the impact that research and scholarly communications has on a global basis.
So I've just come from the OA Sustainability Small Publisher Session. So jumping from a small publisher session, I see some folks nodding, into the world of some of the largest publishers as a little bit of a kind of a head space change. But within the purview of Wiley, you work with quite a number of publishing partners, a lot of societies. This is not, something that's really new to the scene, but I think there's a renewed emphasis on it now with certain things like the OSTP memo and the shift to open access. Can you tell us a little bit about working with those partners? What kind of advice would you give if there are potential partners here who are thinking, should they explore a potential relationship?
Yeah, I think it's a huge question. And it's one that, when I talk about sort of being at a design moment, I think there are a tremendous number of things to recommend the full-scale shift to open access as quickly as possible. Chief among them, public access to research, the benefit of more readership and more citations for researchers, the obvious improvements to access across the board from a reading perspective. But there are also unintended consequences and one of them impacts the group you were talking about. So yeah, Wiley, we have 900 society publishing partners, many of whom used to publish on their own and now work with us to leverage our infrastructure or our technology capabilities. But we also have another 450 or so partners in a division we call Partner Solutions, which we formally launched last month at the Frankfurt Book Fair, but which we've been working on for quite a while. And in conversations with those folks, and I think it's important to put that out there, the complexity of this move from a subscription model where authors submit and publishers publish and libraries pay brings with it a huge change to just about everything in the workflow, just about everything in terms of the infrastructure, and the ability for smaller publishers to come to, and societies to interact with that complexity and scale it in their organizations and change and then be sustainable through that transition is, in my mind, a real question mark right now. Wiley, just as an example, we've done dozens and dozens of large-scale transitional agreements at the country level, at the state level, at the consortia level. They're incredibly complex, and no two are alike, right? What the University of California wants is different than what Keith wants. Hi, Keith, at Carnegie Mellon. It's different than what Project Deal wants in Germany, which is different again to what the Italian deal looks like, and is different again to what happens at the JISC in the UK. And Wiley spends millions of dollars a year trying to build systems and staff up to deal with that complexity. And we can, because we're a scaled player. But smaller publishers, and certainly society publishers, who don't have that scale or the ability to ingest that complexity and then react to it and innovate around it and build the systems they need, and libraries who need to all of a sudden become, in some ways, the enforcement arm of policy mandates, memos, or who want slightly different things for their own reasons, are both creators of that complexity, but also in some ways need to respond to it in the context of mandates that their researchers are under or institutional mandates. Many of these mandates are unfunded from a library perspective. So there's a whole lot going on there. And just to come back to the question around smaller publishers and societies, it's not really concern trolling at all where this is coming from. This is from a real perspective of working with hundreds and hundreds of societies. They need help transitioning their journal programs. They need help transitioning their editorial programs. They need help transitioning their infrastructure in order to make it work.
I want to talk a little bit more about the partner solutions. And I was at the Frankfurt Book Fair 2 weeks ago and managed not to catch COVID, which is not something we can say for everyone who was there. But it was quite a big splash. But I think, in addition to launching partner services, Wiley's acquired a number of companies that connect to different parts of the publisher life cycle, the researcher life cycle. Can you talk a little bit more about how that changes your perspective moving into those other spaces?
Yeah, our perspective is a lot different than it would have been 4 or 5 years ago. I think a lot of this was, and so just to give some context, as I mentioned before, we sort of formalized an announcement of a new segment inside of Wiley that looks at providing services and solutions to publishers and libraries who are attempting to retool or need to retool for an open access world. And a big part of that decision for us was informed by some of this complexity that I was just talking about. It's the question of how do you identify an author in order to tie that author's funding requirements around which license they need to sign, in order to request reimbursement for an APC, in order to report back to a funder, report back to a research office at a university. Doing that at scale, and we get a new submission about every 45 seconds. So doing that at scale requires a lot of know-how and knowledge. And the biggest thing that we learned was that we were in a text world and we needed to be in a data world. We were in a world where everything from the submission system, when you submit an article, through the peer review systems, through the systems that authors need to figure out which CC license to sign, and then all the reporting back to all the different stakeholders, none of those systems were fit for purpose. And so my biggest takeaway is just how important standards are and just how important data is at the heart of sort of driving the compliance issues, driving the mandates and the response to them, but also simply being able to run any side of a transaction. If it's on the library side, how do you validate that this author really works at your institution when they've got a dual appointment? Who determines which author needs to pay if there's 12 authors on a paper and they work at 10 different schools? What role is a university willing to play in that? What role are you as librarians being asked to play in that? What role are we as publishers being asked to play in it? And from all that complexity, we looked at it and said, well, we've got to figure this out first for ourselves at Wiley. And once we did that, we said, well, it doesn't make sense for a standalone self-published society or a smaller publisher to try and replicate all that infrastructure. It's just too expensive and it's going to take too long. And so if we want to move as quickly as we can to an OA future, then we've got to have infrastructure, tools, services that are fit for that purpose. So it's a lot of investment, it's a lot of work, and we're excited about it, but it's also something that I personally think should have the impact of allowing societies and smaller publishers to retain their independence. And that's a key note I want to strike, because I don't think it's good if the only way you can be sustainable on the publishing side is if you get acquired by a company like Wiley, or if you need to do a publishing deal with a company like Wiley. Because there are lots of good reasons why smaller self-published societies or why smaller publishers want to retain their independence and do their own thing and set their own agenda. But they need help to do it. So that's the main reason we started Partner Solutions.
I always have to bring up accessibility because it's very important to me, and I know it's important to a lot of folks in the room, and that is not, you haven't overlooked that in this process. Can you talk a little bit about how Inera is participating in the wider vision?
Yeah, so we spend a lot of time thinking about accessibility, and there's sort of 2 points I want to make, and one of them is about sort of the technical side of it. Again, it's a scaling question. As a provider of platform services, about 55% of the peer-reviewed literature in the world flows through the Adipon platform, and Anera is part of Adipon. And so we have a role as stewards of that platform to make sure that we are working on accessibility from the ground up at all times. So we've got a dedicated user experience team that works on that, and we make that available to all of our partners free of charge, just to make sure that everybody can do the things that they're required to do by statute, but also do the right thing in terms of making content available and easy to read and easy to access. But there's a second piece, which goes back to sort of again, this design moment that we're at. I talked about unintended consequences for smaller publishers and societies. I do think we don't spend enough time at all talking about the unintended consequences of moving to an APC model for the top journals in the world on researchers who can't afford to pay APCs. And that is a major access challenge, access to these services, that I believe is an industry-wide challenge and an industry-wide opportunity for us to really be sure that we haven't priced out or roped off and moved the gatekeeping from the journal editorial boards to the journal pricing mechanisms in terms of how we're allowing people to participate in that ecosystem. It's not sustainable or fair or right for us to use the same kinds of pricing approaches or to use or to push the problem of and the wish for an open access future into conflict with people's ability to pay for access to the services. And that's a second leg of that access or accessibility stool that I don't want to leave out of the conversation.
So I'm a historian. I talk about it all the time. And when open access first became a thing, my historian friends on Facebook were sending these things around like, look, this journal, not only do they think I'm going to pay them to publish my stuff, but if I send it before the first of the year, I get a discount to pay them to publish my stuff. And they just didn't get it. And I would think, should I actually engage, on Facebook? And so Wiley has a wide number of subject areas that are covered from the hard sciences on, through to humanities and social sciences. And just like there's not one funding model that fits every researcher everywhere in the world, it's definitely the case with certain disciplines, and it's been heartening to me to see the participation from social scientists and historians and other folks in the humanities in the OA system, because they have access to funds through transformative agreement, or because during COVID they recognize that they really want the people and places that they study or the populations that they do research on to have access to that content. So how do you make sure that in this a space where some disciplines are so further ahead and have different funding models, how do you make sure that you can tackle that?
So, first of all, I agree with you that transitional or transformative agreements can have a huge impact for the institutions that are already participating in the ecosystem and for the researchers who are lucky enough to work there. So, essentially, the TA model really works well for humanities and social sciences at big research institutions, at institutions who've had large collections for years and who are eager to shift the funding to pay for publishing output. And that's great, and it works great for publishers too. But the challenge that we have is for that researcher who works at a community college who's trying to get their first paper published, or the one who works in the Global South who's trying to get her first paper published. And so we have to have, I think, real deep thought and flexibility around how we make those services available. I am very encouraged by what I see coming out of the smaller societies in the space. My friend is the head of the Pierce Plowman Society. The Pierce Plowman Society doesn't get a lot of funding from UKRI, but they've found ways to manage their journal program and manage their small journal more efficiently and more effectively so that they can make access to that journal work and comply with the mandates coming out of Research England, for example. But that same experience they're having might not apply in Australia, and it might not apply in California, and it might not apply in Italy. And so again, the complexity is the thing I worry about. And we lose sight of the researcher when we're all wrapped up in that complexity. And we lose sight of the actual experience of an author who's trying to just succeed, right? As long as the behavioral economics of I have to publish in order to get academic advancement remain the same, there are huge disincentives and huge barriers to folks in those positions. And it's, as somebody who came out of the humanities and aspired at one point to be a working member of the Humanities Academy, at heart, like that's the only content we publish I'm plausibly a user of, right? So I care deeply about the way this is going to play out. And it's something at Wiley, because we have so many social science and humanities societies in our list, it's something we care about from kind of an economic perspective as well.
So do we have any questions from the audience? I've got plenty more. I don't want to monopolize the conversation, though. Any questions still formulating?
There's one.
Okay, over here.
Thank you, Susan. Yeah. So, a question for Jay. I'm sure you've heard of like ESG, right? And companies, for-profit companies, trying to be, I guess, more socially responsible. So, and they're trying to formalize, how do they measure whether a company is being, environmental, socially, governmentally responsible? How does OA, rather than it just being like a superficial trend, how can we measure that it is actually having a broader social impact, even an economic impact, So I don't know if my question is clear enough, but that's where my focus is right now.
Yeah, I was reading a paper on the Dora website the other night, and I forget the name of the paper and the author, so I'm a bad panelist at this point because I should name check that person. But it was in part about this question. And it's something, sure, Wiley has a set of ESG goals that we talk about with our shareholders and we talk about with our board of directors and with the Wiley family and those things. But I think it's really important for companies like Wiley to commit to being carbon neutral or to sign the joint commitment on equity and research that we have, and to try and do things like diversify our editorial boards and do the things that we've already committed to do. But the answer to your question from my perspective is it's bottled up and connected with this question of what we do at this design moment. So there's one version of the world, and I think this is the one I am most optimistic about, where what open access does is it democratizes the outputs of science and research in such a way that we bring, what are we talking about here? We're talking about food security, water security, we're talking about vaccines, we're talking about economics, we're talking about the most important questions that the human project concerns itself with, I think. That's what scholarly communications is at its core set up to do, is to make sure that the research that's happening at the bench, in the lab, in the field, is as widely disseminated and as widely available to anybody as possible. And we don't do all of this for reflective or navel-gazing reasons. We do it because it's supposed to have an impact. And by taking down those barriers to access to the research, I think it can have profound and transformative impact on the way technology gets translated into industry and the way that folks can manage and grow crops, and they can remediate pollution, and they can do all kinds of amazing things. But there's another fork in the road where you go, wow, if what ends up happening is the rich northern hemisphere creates a walled garden for access to the entire ecosystem because of the way we've set up the model, then we've really missed a huge opportunity there. And that's the thing that I just want to keep coming back to, right? We're past this era of the big deal, right, in librarianship and publisher relations. That era is over. The one good thing about that era was everybody knew how to do it already. Everybody knew what the contracts looked like. Everybody knew what the requirements looked like. Everybody knew what the usage data needed to say. Everybody knew that it was a price negotiation. At this moment, we're redefining everything. And so, I want to focus on the benefits that I think are there to get from removing barriers to access, while at the same time not losing sight of what could happen if we just let the sort of, if we let the thing run too far without actually intentionally making some decisions and designing it.
We have a question in the middle.
One microphone and a question in the middle.
Yeah, if you stand up or put your hand up so our kind microphone runner can find you.
We could make it a game actually to see
I
the
can
farthest
see it,
point the mic has to walk.
So one of the reasons libraries started to look at open access solutions is to reduce the cost and to tackle the inflation that we have been facing in subscribing to information resources. But with the open access agreements, the transformative open access agreements, the way we are seeing it now, it doesn't do that. It's like, we just have to buy APCs in addition to what we're subscribing to. And that also keeps inflating over the years. And of course, I understand the publishers, of course, they want to maintain their profits. The libraries struggle from the budget cuts. So how the publishers like Wiley kind of mediate this, reach a fair maybe module that a win-win deal between libraries and publishers.
Right. I think the most important thing to say is that we're moving exactly as fast as our customers want to move to transition and transform the agreement. So if a library wants to do a transformational agreement, we're ready and willing and able to do it. But we don't have a particular timetable in mind. We're trying to be as responsive as we possibly can. And there are things that unlock that, right? Things like the Nelson Memo, things like a large nationwide consortium saying, here's what we want to do, here's our strategy. Things like a mandate in the UK, like we saw with UKRI. I think, and I've been having conversations, I often internally will say that, kind of to your point earlier, Heather, open access is an overnight revolution 25 years in the making. I mean, I had my first conversation about open access at ALA Midwinter in 1998. And so I think that you're absolutely right, and it's only fair and appropriate to acknowledge that the cereals crisis of the 90s, as it was called then, drove a huge movement around let's do the Budapest Declaration, let's talk about a way to create a new model. I think that remembering as a field sales rep, like what the pricing was for another large publisher back in the day, I would show up and say, I'll cap your price increase at 7.5% a year, right? And we will do 3-year deals and we'll add an electronic access fee on top of that. And there's no cancellations. And that was seen as progress. So we've come a long, long way in that time. And I think the other thing is, this isn't a closed system, right? And so it's really important to understand that the folks who are going to see the cost benefit of the open access transition, and I think we get there as quickly as you want us to get there in a lot of ways, the folks who are going to see the cost benefit aren't the people in this room, right? They are the community college librarians who are paying for access to journals through EBSCO. They are the academic librarians who build collections at small liberal arts schools who won't have to pay for those collections anymore because all the content's going to be open. they are researchers in the Global South and librarians in the Global South who won't pay anymore, or will pay a fraction of what they're paying now because the content is open. But from this publisher's perspective anyway, the research-intensive universities, together with the funders, have opted for this course, right? Through sets of policies and provisions, and we support it, right? We think it's the right thing to do. But the benefits are going to be unequally distributed. They're going to come, and they are coming right now. You know, 1 out of every 3 papers Wiley published this year is going to be open. So we're moving as fast as we can. The benefits are going to be spread more equally, but I don't know how, I mean, I do know some of the theories about how we might solve the problem you address. From my perspective, we're doing what we can to try and comply with the direction that's set in support of it. And we're changing our business model and adapting as fast as we can. I see others doing that, but yeah, that's a hot take, though, right? Like that feels like the kind of thing that you know, we should have a lot of conversations about as we design the next 20 years of this.
Any more questions in the back? Because we want you to get your steps in today.
That's right.
Thanks so much. My name's James Rhodes from Virginia Tech.
Hi, James.
Thanks so much for doing this talk. Really appreciate it. But you just said something, and I deal with licenses at Virginia Tech, and you said that anybody that wants to, that you'll do an agreement. So if somebody's in the middle of a contract, you'll work with them to get out of that contract and start a new license. Did I hear that correctly?
Yeah, I mean, we serve at the pleasure of all of you, right? If there's a reasonable conversation to be had, and I don't know the details of your particular license agreement, I'll look to some of my colleagues in the room who can talk about that, but it is my policy and it's our intention to move as quickly as the customers want us to move. So yeah, I don't see why we couldn't have that conversation. I don't know the particulars of your exact deal, but maybe we could talk about that.
Well, my deal is through Viva, but I just thought for the benefit of all the librarians
sure.
in here,
Right.
you know, that you might want to, if you want to do this, he said it, so let's do it.
Anybody else want to corner Jay into agreeing to something that the salespeople will?
No, that's not a gotcha moment, man. Like we've said it, right? We've transitioned twice as much of our portfolio as our largest competitor and 50% more than our second largest, right? We know where we're going with this as Wiley. Like we understand the direction of travel, and so as librarians are ready to move their Wiley agreement and any of the societies that we represent to a transformative agreement, we're delighted to have the conversation. I want to be really clear about this. Like, I was the one who went to the Wiley family and said, we have to do this, right? This is sort of, for me, this is the reason that I am in the role that I'm in, leading Wiley's research business. It's my job for us to not only transition our journal business, but also to help the rest of the industry do it through better technology, better solutions, and other things. That's why I get out of bed every morning. So I'm very, very happy to have those conversations.
Questions? Well, I have another question.
Wait, we got
Oh.
one right here.
No,
No,
we're
the
gonna
microphone,
come
you
to
just
you.
wait patiently while the microphone makes its way to you, right here in the middle.
We need like one of those things that goes do 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 do.
Where are you? I don't see your hand. There you go.
These lights are bright.
Try not to trip on it, I promise.
Hello, my name is Kinneret. I'm from University of Miami. I'm the assessment librarian. And I want to go back to one thing you said about the big deal, that everything was, we got to a point that everything was known and was defined, and we knew what to expect, and we knew how to assess what we are getting. So it's an open question now. How can we start moving, transforming to open and to those agreements, not having to go through several years with 7% increase, and
Right.
define faster that we will get to a win-win situation in advance, or more transparency at the beginning, so we'll know to assess better if moving to those new agreements that are not defined and we are not really sure how to assess, and the future is not as clear as now for us for the big deals. So it's an open question. How do you think we can get faster to a situation that we know that we are doing the right thing, moving to those new agreements?
It is a absolutely spot on question from my perspective. And it's something that, again, I just, to a point I made earlier, right? So print to digital, like all of the things that happened that got us to the big deal, right? There were decisions made about, I don't know, perpetual access rights, right? Somebody decided, Karen Hunter decided, right, that perpetual access rights would be given to content that was subscribed to at full price, but not to content that was topped up and added onto the top of a big deal, right? Sounded smart at the time, could justify it, allowed publishers to make some additional margin later selling back files, who knows what. That is impossible to manage. And not only that, but the paper contracts on which these deals were signed in 1999 don't exist anymore. Nobody knows where they are. That's one example of these decisions that I just off the top of my head, I'm just making this up as I go along here, right? But like at this moment where we are saying, what is gold, what is green, what is diamond, what is bronze, what is platinum? At this moment where funders are putting out different requirements into the marketplace. And in the US, for example, the Nelson memo says the departments will define for their grantees how it's going to happen. We could wind up with 5, 6 different versions of what an IR mandate is, or what in Germany, we spent a lot of time debating with Max Planck Digital Library what the definition of a German author was, right? That definition took 2 months to negotiate. And we did it for ourselves, and I know my colleagues in the back did it for themselves, and et cetera, and et cetera. So I really honestly believe that, again, I hate to repeat myself here, but we're designing this now. And so I do think that standard terms, standard definitions, transparency about them, all of that will require us to come together. I would be more than happy for the industry to adopt, for example, for the community, not just the publishers, to adopt standard defined terms for some of the things I just talked about. That way we could all educate ourselves what they meant, and we could move forward, and it would reduce complexity. It would reduce legal fees. It would reduce all of that. There's a lot to talk about. And unfortunately, from my perch, I see this actually getting more fragmented at the moment than coming together, right? I'm just gonna, I don't mean to sound gloomy about that. It's just the reality. As I said before, our experiences in the various geographies in which we operate and under the various funding regimes that our customers operate would lead me to conclude that we are actually atomizing the discussion right now rather than bringing it together. And I worry about that for smaller publishers. I already talked about that. I worry about it for libraries. I had a head of a Russell Group library tell me she had to hire 14 people, right, in order to staff up, move positions, bring new roles in order to staff up to comply with the UKRI mandate to make sure that she was doing her job enforcing that policy. I don't know any of you in the room who are librarians who have 14 extra positions lying around to do 2 or 3 TAs, let alone all of your agreements as TAs. So, we've got it. This is far too complex, right? I think, to be sustainable.
Thank you.
We have another question? Yeah. Oh, Colleen. I just want to give a plug in this afternoon at 4 in Ballroom 1. John McDonald and Michael Levine Clark and I are presenting on how to evaluate the return on read and publish, like how to put the read part together with the publish part. So maybe that would be useful to help define, some of those parameters at least. Colleen, go ahead.
Thank you. Colleen Campbell of the Max Planck Digital Library and Open Access 2020 Initiative. First, just a quick comment and then my real question. So, things sound scary talking about all of this complexity, but I just wanted to say that there is a lot of work has been done, right, by the first movers, and a lot of standards are being created. We have OA Switchboard now. We've got the ESAC recommendations and things. So I don't want everyone to be terrified of the complexity, right? Because the community is working toward producing things to help us all. Now, setting that aside, because you spoke about access earlier and wanting to make sure that that all authors have access to open access publishing services. This is something that we're thinking about because based in Europe, we've already worked through a few phases of agreements and we're looking at what comes next. And this is of course on our minds as well. And recently, Johan Rorik and Farana Osman, Johan Rorik of Coalition S, Farana Osman of the National Science Foundation in South Africa, wrote a paper proposing that open access publishing services, the fees, the costs, should be based on purchasing power parity. I mean, we're coming from a world of subscriptions where pricing was not transparent, but I think there was the general understanding that what an institution in the US paid was very different from what an institution in Ghana paid. And so the question is, as we move to an open access world, where we already have a lot more transparency around the costs. Have you thought about something like purchasing power parity? Have you given any thought to actually practically putting into effect some concrete mechanisms to make sure that open access publishing services are are globally equitable?
Yes. So there's a couple of things to say there. First of all, we recently did a transformational agreement. Every researcher in South Africa can publish with Wiley as part of that agreement. And not only that, but we invested additional resource into making sure that we were able to help researchers prepare for that first submission and learn more about the process, because that is also a daunting feature of it. There are a number of different schemes that are in place. One is, remember, about half of Wiley's content comes from societies, right? So our societies are also deeply intertwined in this and deeply enmeshed in this. So we have a variety of programs that we put in place that use society membership, which is often given free to folks in developing economies and developing countries, to make sure that they've got a free way to publish, right? From our perspective, the marginal cost associated with that is far outweighed by the benefit of providing access to these services. And so our societies together with us are really working on ways to do that. There are early career approaches. Every editor at Wiley also has the ability to waive an APC at her or his discretion to make sure that folks continue to get access. Now, that's not a scalable model, right? It's not scalable. So then you get into the pricing question. And you're absolutely right that historically, subscriptions have been tiered, right? I don't know that Ghana's paid anything. Just on, Research for Life has, at least in our case, right? Research for Life has done a pretty good job of providing an awful lot of countries with access to journal publishing content for free. But I think the PPP approach, and I don't agree with Johan on a lot of things, but on this, we're in alignment, that we've got to figure out ways to make the APC an affordable prospect, as affordable in Cambridge, Mass, as it is in Cambridge, UK, as it is in Brazil or in Ghana. So again, this is a moment we have to design it, right? And so I'm certain that as we make changes down this path, if it's diversifying our editorial boards, if it's in diversifying our peer review cohort, if it's making sure that authors don't lose the ability to publish as a result of unintended consequences in the transition, it's the kind of stuff we have to keep an eye on. So, and yes, I want to acknowledge the great work that not only Max Planck and others have done to drive us to standards that will reduce some of the complexity that you're talking about. Your team is great to work with, and your organization are real thought leaders. I would love it if everybody followed your model. So I'm really happy to talk more about that.
We're at time, so with that, I'd like to thank Jay for speaking with us today and hope that he gets the most out of this session and this conference as I do.
Thank you, everyone. Thanks.